Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. The case that I'm going to be looking into today is the murderer Andrew Dawson. He was a convicted killer who murdered two of his neighbours whilst he was actually out on licence for an earlier crime he committed. This was another suggested case and it was suggested by Sir Colin, so thank you for that. I appreciate any suggestions you guys have. I would just like to let you know that I've opened a Patreon account for anyone that is interested, and you can go over to that. Link will be in the description, and it's just a way that you could support me whilst I'm trying to make my channel grow. So thank you so much for all your support, guys. I appreciate you all. I'd just like to let you know, I mean no disrespect to anyone I talk about today. I've just gathered this information off the internet to compile into a video for educational purposes. Andrew Dawson was born in 1963. He was born and raised in Ormskirk in Lancashire, England, which was normally a quiet, calm and peaceful little town. He was one of 6 children from a working class family, and they said that they never really had much money, but they just did the best that they could. And Andrew, from quite a very young age, was quite antisocial and reckless. He would go on and steal money off other kids because he wanted it and he felt like it should be his and not theirs. Around the age of 8 or 9, having it in his head that if he wanted it, he would go and get it, he would steal more often. As he got older, he got involved in the drug scene. He would smoke cannabis from the age of around 14, I believe, and he began stealing from his own brother. That got him involved with the law because his brother reported it and it got him sent to Borstal. It was here he got worse rather than better. It was said that he would, in his head, he would target people that were vulnerable. So if you could look after yourself, he wouldn't target you. But if he knew that you were, say, elderly or something like that and a more vulnerable person, that those would be the people that he would target because he felt like he could get away with it more. He then got into hard drugs and also began abusing alcohol too. In August of 1981, an urgent call out was made to the police to say that a man that worked in a shop had not been seen for a couple of days and the doors were all open and they thought there'd been a burglary. This man was 91-year-old Henry Walsh, a shopkeeper that lived above his shop, which he had owned since the 1950s. When police attended with possible reports of a robbery, what they actually found was a murder. He was hanging from some coat hangers off the door, kind of attached to his clothes, so that's how he was found hanging there. And he was also found with a ligature around his neck. He had been stabbed 11 times. His jaw had also been fractured and the bread knife that was used to stab him was still in his chest, and it was also stuck into the door, so it had been plunged in with that much force that it went into the door too. Henry's pet dog had also been butchered during the frenzied attack. The police launched an investigation. They didn't know who had done it, just that they were capable of extreme violence. They looked into the case even further and they found out that he'd actually been tortured. Now, as they thought it was robbery based, they believed that possibly the assailant had the knife and was kind of poking him with it, stabbing him with it, but not too deeply. Probably saying, "Where's your money? Tell me where the money is," and then just stabbing him slightly kind of thing. And that was repeated over and over. They cordoned off the scene and they scoured for any evidence they could find. The media came around and the only thing that they told them was that a man had been stabbed, so they kept a lot of information to themselves and not in the public eye. Several days after Henry's murder, the police were really no closer to discovering who had done it. And it was a crime that really shocked the town. People were really worried and they just couldn't believe that someone had just killed this vulnerable, innocent man. The police went on to find out that the day that he was actually murdered was on market day. Now, they held this market day and people from all over different towns would come in and would join in it and buy things from it. And so that just made the suspect pool even larger, because not only was it now what the entire town kind of thing, it could be potentially people from other towns too. Because of this, they put out a media appeal and got all the information out there, and people started coming forward with the theories as to what had happened, and one name kept sticking out: the then 18-year-old Andrew Dawson. He had actually been seen in a pub just 200 yards from the murder scene on the fruit machines, spending a lot of money. Now, Andrew was very well known in the area as to not really ever have any money, and so people were questioning where he had got this large sum of money. Somebody had just been robbed, and then this person who never normally has any money comes in and plays a load of money on the fruit machines. It was very weird. It just made him a possible suspect in the case. The people that kind of knew him and knew of him in the town and the community wouldn't have ever really put him forward as a suspect in this case. I guess they never thought he was capable of anything like that. It was a very, very violent crime, and he was just known as this petty thief. Yes, a general nuisance to the town, but no one ever thought he was capable of something like that. Despite that, they didn't have anything else to go on, so they began looking into Andrew. He was well known to the police, but he was just known as a bit of a brash lad, a bit of a bully, but nothing more. The police then found out that Andrew had cashed a pension book in town belonging to Henry. It all seemed to be pointing that actually he was their man, and 7 days later the police did move in on him and he quickly confessed to the crime. The subsequent court case at Preston Crown Court heard that on the morning of the murder on the 13th of August, Andrew actually left work early that day in the pretense that he had to go to the opticians. But he went to the bank, he got some money out and he spent it all on alcohol and gambling machines. The court was then told that later on when he was walking around town after already spending all of his money, he went to then carry out the burglary. He walked to his elderly victim's shop and it was closed at the time. But Henry returned at 3 p.m, walks in on him trying to rob the joint and says to him, "I know who you are." The prosecution said that Andrew panicked, he picked up the bread knife and began plunging it into Henry's body. The court was told that Henry actually had a reputation for hiding money in his shop, but Andrew did not find the £1,800 that was hidden in various places in his store. Instead, he took the small change from the till and his pension book, which he later cashed in for £50. He stole this poor man's life for £50. In a police statement at the time, Andrew said, "I am sorry for what I've done. I had no intention to cause anybody any harm. I just got frightened and panicked. I wish it was me and not him." The judge in the case then said that Andrew was obviously shocked by what he had done, but jailed him for life in March 1982 after he had admitted to the murder. His brother, however, Mally, said that he saw that he had no remorse in his face whatsoever. It is said as well that the younger the person commits a crime, it's more likely that they will commit again. And in this case, Andrew didn't even have to kill Henry. He was 91 and he could have just robbed him and shoved him out of the way kind of thing. He didn't really have to murder him, but he did. He robbed his life, and yes, okay, maybe he didn't want to be implicated in the crime later on. He didn't want to be identified as the person that had robbed him, and possibly you could say that that's why he did it, but he literally tortured him. He tortured him before he killed him. So it just showed to experts that he had a strange mentality. He was told that he would serve a minimum of 14 years in prison. When he was 19 years old, he was convicted of the murder of Henry Walsh. Andrew really thought he was this big man. He went to jail and he met the serial killers such as Peter Sutcliffe, who was the Yorkshire Ripper, and Nielsen, and he thought that they were nothing and that he wanted to better them, which of course is seriously not a good mentality for when he will eventually be released, if he would eventually be released. He served 17 years in prison for Henry's murder, and whilst inside he passed these courses, he went on training so that he could get a job when he's released into the world and become employed. In 1999, he was released back into society. He met a young woman and he moved to Derby to be with her. They then had children, and in 2000 they got married. Even though he had committed such a serious crime, his family supported him. They felt like him going to prison, he'd been rehabilitated, his life was now on track, he had a wife, he had kids, and they really supported him. His oldest brother was actually his best man at his wedding. And everyone thought that his life was going in the right direction. He had a job, he would go out on weekends and go to the pub and drink, but it would only be limited to weekends kind of thing. It seemed like prison had actually rehabilitated him like it was supposed to. The thing was, he had his routine, but it eventually began to slip. He began drinking more and his behaviour began deteriorating again. His marriage became strained because he was going out drinking all the time, and he was also back on the drugs again. They were together for 3 years, but they did eventually separate because she just had enough. She couldn't cope with it. He was on limited access to see his children, and his life just seemed to be all going downhill. In 2003, he was arrested for being drunk and disorderly, and that broke his rules of release, so he spent 6 months in jail. As I said, his life was kind of falling apart, and he was under a lot of stress with his family problems and not being able to see his kids, and that just increases a person's chances of committing another crime. He was caught sleeping rough in possession of a knife, and he was not allowed to be in possession of any kind of weapon, and so back inside he went again for another year. In 2010, he moved into a one-bedroom flat in Chaddesden, which is a Derby suburb. His neighbour Alan Cliff thought he was just this normal guy. He seemed pleasant, he was always kind of nice enough, and he was a man that just kept himself to himself. Eventually though, he did open up to his neighbour, and rightly so. Alan was worried about it. Who wouldn't be? 6 weeks passed by and Andrew goes over to Alan's apartment and he is all agitated. He's got this pack of beers and he's acting very strangely, but he says to him, I thought we were supposed to be having a drink. They must have prearranged it at some point. And so Alan lets him in and they have a couple of beers. Now, all of a sudden, Andrew just spontaneously grabs a hold of Alan's neck with his arm like in a chokehold. Luckily, Alan actually does manage to free himself from it. And it probably shocked Andrew. Alan chucks him out, but he never actually reported it to the police, and he never saw him again. Downstairs, however, the police were already on scene. They were investigating a body that had been found. Coincidental? I think not. John Dave Matthews' body had been found. He was a 68-year-old man that lived alone in his flat. He was found fully clothed in the bath, which was full, and it had been there for days. So as you can imagine, when the police went in, it was not a pretty sight. His body would have all been bloated. And his neighbours were really surprised that he had actually taken his own life. He was this really nice guy who would kind of do anything that he could to help other people. So people did think it was very, very weird. His body was sent off for post-mortem, and it painted a very different picture to what the police initially thought. They found multiple stab wounds to his body, so it was definitely not suicide. His family was rightly so devastated. They started investigating and they found that bleach was in the bathwater. So whoever had done this kind of knew what they were doing a little bit. They put the bleach in the water, they cleaned up the scene, and they left very little evidence behind. The flat was very clean, it was very tidy, it didn't seem to show any signs of a struggle, and that is why they initially thought suicide. This person, whoever did this, was very forensically aware. And it made people believe that it was actually pre-planned. The scary thing was, though, it was seemingly without a motive. The police started their investigation. They began speaking to other people that lived in the building. It was a theory whoever had done this was very aware of the flats, of how to get in them, how to get out them. And so they interviewed everyone there. Well, one name stood out from the people who were talking to them, and that was Andrew Dawson. He was, as you know, a previous offender, having stabbed Henry to death when he was 18. They wanted to speak to him, but he wasn't there. Alan was convinced that they had the right guy because he had obviously tried to strangle him before. Andrew was their #1 suspect. They searched his flat, they seized his items, and they believed that he may have gone on the run. They found out that he had taken a train to Sheffield and then to Ormskirk, which is where he committed his first murder. Because of course he still had family members there. Andrew goes to visit his older brother Mally. He's agitated. He goes on about how his wife isn't letting him see his kids. He wasn't making much sense in the conversation by all accounts, and he began hinting that he might end up back in jail. Eventually, he left claiming that he was going camping. Police began chasing him, and as Andrew called in other family members before going on the run again. Back in Derby, detectives were about to make another horrific discovery though. They did door-to-door inquiries, obviously, as I said, and there was one person that hadn't actually answered the door, and it was a man called Paul Hancock. They also found out that he had not actually been seen for days, and so they got worried. They already had one murder in that building, and this man hadn't been seen for days. So they forced entry, and they found that Paul Hancock, who was 58 at the time, had been stabbed to death brutally in his own home. He had been murdered, he was again placed in the bath, and he was found just 5 days later in the same building. The circumstances were similar. There was the bath with the bleach in and full water, and he was fully clothed, he'd been stabbed. But this time there was no attempt to clean anything up, to hide any evidence, and there was clear signs of a struggle. It was seemingly like this person left all the evidence of the attack behind and just left in a hurry. And once more, it was suspected to be Andrew Dawson. When they were searching around Andrew's flat, they found a notebook too, and it didn't have anything on top, but if you put enough force on a pencil, it leaves indentations on the paper below, and even though it was blank, it revealed a vital clue. The forensic examination of that revealed a semi-confession from Andrew. He signed the note Angel of Mercy, but he had never actually sent that note to the detectives. So no one is really sure why he wrote it out. Normally he'd write it out with the intention to send it, whether he just did it to clear his conscience and then binned it. I don't know. They tried to piece together what had happened, and then they found out that Andrew had actually been known to take his washing to John Matthews' house, and it's believed that that's how he got in, and then he stabbed him in the hallway. He took his time to clear up the scene, to wash away any evidence, and then 2 weeks later he struck again, with Paul this time. Again, he put him in the bath, he filled it with water and bleach. And then it's believed that he later went to Alan Cliff's house, all agitated after what he'd just done, and tried to strangle him, then eventually went on the run. Police searched everywhere for him. They circulated his details to other forces because they thought he was on the run and he could possibly strike again. You know, he'd killed 2 people now in this time frame. Obviously, he killed Henry before, but in this time frame, he'd just killed 2 people, and so maybe he would strike again. They checked on people he'd come into contact with because, again, they were just worried about him. He literally killed 2 of his neighbours for no apparent reason. As they were going through all that, they managed to find CCTV footage of Andrew. And not before long, he was spotted in the town of Whitehaven. He had been drinking and he was asleep on a bench. In CCTV footage, you can see him running away from the police, and he jumps in some river and tries to swim away from them. With nowhere else to go, he eventually has to return back to the dry land, and they arrest him, and on him he had knives amongst other things. In July of 2011, Andrew stood trial, and he pleaded not guilty. He didn't show any signs of empathy for what he'd done, or anything really. After hours passed in court, he asked everyone to stop, and he had a word with his defendant, and he asked for the charges to be read to him again, which this time he did plead guilty. He basically knew that he was done for. And now Andrew Dawson was a convicted triple killer, and the judge added him to the list of the 46 most serious and violent offenders that will never be released. So on this occasion, his life sentence actually meant a life sentence. His family felt that this was unforgivable, and it just must have been so difficult for them because, you know, they stuck with him after everything, after the first murder, and he just did it again. My heart, of course, goes out to the families and the victims and everyone involved in this case. And unfortunately, this time, the justice system for Andrew Dawson didn't work. He wasn't rehabilitated. He was for a few years, but then he just slipped back into his old ways. The thing that you can get from this, though, is that he will never get out now, and so he will never be able to do that to anyone ever again. If you guys have any more suggestions, please let me know and I will look into them for you. Give me a big thumbs up on the video and subscribe to my channel if you so wish. Anyway guys, that's all I have today on the case of Andrew Dawson. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye.